Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to the Occult Exploration Society. I'm Snappy, and I'm joined as always by my good friend and co-host Dion. How you doing, Dion?
Life is wonderful today.
Life is wonderful, beautiful. Love to hear it. Love to hear it. Love to hear it, man. This is going to be a really fun episode. So we here at the Occult Exploration Society, we're all about diving deep into the mythology, looking at the past, the present, exploring it from various angles. And today we each got two presentations for you, continuing our series on the Materia Prima. And this is really focusing on great mother cults of the Mediterranean with looking through that Greek lens as sort of a way to connect everything across history. So, Dion, why don't you talk a bit about what we've been discussing throughout this series before
Mm,
we get into today?
I think last week was Hecate.
Last week, yes, Hecate, right?
Yeah. Phosphoros as the light bringer, holding torches.
It was so wild, right? Hecate is such an incredible and interesting deity. You know, we went to the deep. We tried to go into her as much as we could, but there's just so much and so much change over time that it's like you feel like as soon as that episode was over, I felt like I could have talked for 2 more hours, and there was a dozen more sources I wanted to show Ammon. But we had so much fun, and what we really engaged with was this idea that Hecate is this kind of virginal goddess of the threshold, right? She is the one who can see in the three worlds. And that's kind of, those two things are the most continuous of her images. But she expands and becomes such an essential figure to all things feminine as well. You know, she is such a, you know, an important goddess within the Greek pantheon and also connected to that divine lineage. She is the mother of Medea in much of the stories. She is the Iphimedeia, right? She is often associated with Artemis and the sacrifice. Remember, we talked briefly about these virgin sacrifices and then people being transformed into Hecate. You know, we were looking also at the wheel. Hecate is deeply associated with the spinning. She's that cosmic dancer that spins in the darkness, right? She's associated with the black sun and the strophalos. Um, so much wildness with Hecate. And it's gonna really connect us with Artemis, because what we saw with the tradition with Hecate is she becomes conflated with Artemis. They're kind of like two sides of the same coin, very much interconnected. Though, as we'll see today, Artemis is far more primal in many regards. But this is going to be super, super interesting. Any other thoughts on yesterday or last week's, sorry, episode with Hecate and the Wheel?
The idea of Phosphoros, light bringer, because that'll play in as an epitaph of Artemis or Diana in this episode. Um,
Right.
yeah. So remember, trigger warning. We might talk about wild stuff, sacrifice, anything weird in ancient history. So just be warned, and let's hit the first pick.
Yeah. And that whole phosphorus thing is so wild. Before we get started, I just want to talk a bit. We noticed that it's connected to a bunch of these really important deities: Hecate, Artemis, Apollo, Helios, Dionysus, Prometheus. These light bringing entities, these inspirational entities, these lights in the dark, kind of unconscious entities. Really interesting connection there with the Phosphoros for sure. And always carrying the torches. Hecate, especially, she's usually either seen with the in the earliest images, right? She was seen with the two torches. We saw that maiden, the running maiden at Eleusis, who's guiding the quarry, and she's carrying the two torches, right? And that's one of the most important images of Hecate. And then later you see her as Hecate Trivia, the three torches with the pillar in the middle and her holding the two, right? So, and where she comes to represent the 3 ways or the 4 ways. It's such a intense, profound stuff, right? Anyway,
The crossroads.
exactly.
Well, so I think today we'll start with the birthplace of Artemis with her twin brother Apollo on an island. The island is Delos,
Right.
one of the smallest islands, but one of the most important islands in all the island chain there. We've talked about it in the past in different episodes. I thought I'd just give you a little bit history of the island. Go to the next pick.
Beautiful pick there.
Yeah, to set the stage. They had a temple of Dionysus there. Here's one of these little temples, and they had phallus columns. Obviously, somebody cut off the phallus there. And you can see there's an image of a rooster with the phallus as a head.
It's amazing.
And this was on the island. The island was a little more spicier than people know or imagine, because we in our previous episodes we talked about something, the Athenian purification. I don't know if you remember that, where at a certain point they came to the island, all the Athenians, and they didn't want no more births or deaths. They even dug up all the dead people and took them over to the next island. And from that moment on, there was a law that if anybody was about to die or give birth, they had to get on a boat and go over to one of the next islands. It wasn't allowed there because the island had to be timeless. And this deals with Artemis and Apollo. I don't know if you want to say anything about the twin births.
Yeah, well, in the story, it's such a wild story, right? Leto, the goddess Leto, is being chased by Hera because Hera doesn't want Zeus to have any children with anyone else. She wants to control that line. And we'll see, right? These twins go on to be the most favored. Apollo is Symplegado with Zeus, right? They are alike. He rules in his stead, so he becomes the most favored child, even more favored than Dionysus, so what this sets up is you have Leto being chased by Hera, and she's trying to escape, and as she's trying to escape, she's going and flying over the islands, and she gives birth first to Artemis, Diana, and falls on Delos, but then she helps Leto give birth to Apollo, right? She is the nurse. This is the interesting thing. So one of the most wild parts about Artemis is that she is both that perpetual youth, that perpetual virgin who is chaste, right? Who will never make love or give birth, but she aids in all of the birth, right? Something about that chastity makes it so that she is the perfect one to aid in these things. And she even aids in the birth of her brother Apollo, right?
Yep. The virgin goddess of childbirth. Yeah. It's a wild thing. Go to the next pick. We talked about previously on this island was the center of Roman slave trade.
Right. Oh, I also, just before we go in, I wanted to one last other thing is that one interesting thing about that image of Artemis as the baby who saves her brother Apollo and her mother, right, as the nursemaid, is that we almost don't see any other goddesses represented as babies. Like, I don't see that anywhere else. And so she's really intimately associated with the childhood and the virginity in a way that no other goddess is. You don't really see this child image except for with Artemis. Some people argue that Plutus is intersexed, but that's getting into something else. So yeah, interesting. Anyway.
So a little bit about the island. Delos, smallest island, one of the most important islands, had different temples there, especially to Artemis and Apollo. You had, at a certain point, the Athenian purge, where they dug up all the dead bodies, and they forbid people from giving birth or dying on the island. And if they did, they would get really upset. At a certain point, Mithridates sacked the island, and pirates sacked it. It was the center of Roman slave trade, the young boy trade. This was the capital of the young boy trade at a certain point.
Oh my gosh.
Cleopatra lived there when she escaped at a certain point to live there. It's the island has its own spicy history. I just want you to know that. Think about the other things going on there. They wanted to make it a timeless. That was part of it. It's timeless. No deaths or no births. So let's hit the next pick. So you talked a little bit about their birth as twins with Leto. At a certain point, something happens, and they go on a rampage. This is called the Children of Niobe. And when they're kids, Apollo and Artemis, because I was trying to find stuff about them as kids. Like, you're talking about the baby images, and what do they do as kids? Well, in one fresco, in one story myth, they slaughter a bunch of kids.
Oh, wow. I'm not familiar with this story. That's intense.
The Children of Niobe. It's a wild story. And like I said, they pray to them for them to come down. You can see them in the sky right there attacking all the children to take them out. And it was because what this one lady said, well, I have more kids than Leto. She only has 2. I have 14. And so she told her kids, like, hey, well, let's take care of that. It's a famous myth.
Wow.
The Children of Niobe. So even as children, they were spicy. They were known to battle. They could do some stuff. The bow was already present as children. So we're going to get into some different versions of Artemis when she grows up. You said Diana earlier. Let's jump over, hit the next pick. Since we're at the island, now we're going to jump over to Italy, Lake Nemi. And this is where we get the concept of Nemorensis, Diana Nemorensis and Rex Nemorensis. It's a famous volcanic lake there. A sanctuary to Diana Nemorensis, Diana Lucifera. The term Lucifera, light bringer, torch bearing, that's what the light bringing's from. And the light bringing is also an epitaph to give children as a child bearer. So that's one of her epitaphs. People pray to her for children, fertility. So she hunts. She's a goddess of childbirth, but she doesn't give birth herself.
No, she doesn't give birth herself. This is one of the, so there's a lot to unpack here, and I've been thinking about this a lot. And it seems like she's also, we've talked about, related to the moon and to the unconscious and to the childhood and these transition from maidenhood into womanhood, right? And she guides in birth, and she guides later in that transition from maidenhood to womanhood. I show examples in my presentation, but but she doesn't go through these transformations. I mean, she does become a maiden. She does change from a child to a maiden, but she doesn't ever grow up from being a maiden, and this, she's also representative of that wildness. What's also interesting, she becomes associated, like Athena, with city guardianship, but it's city guardian as protecting us from the wilderness. She's always representative of that wild unconscious, that violentness, that potential craziness. It's just like under the surface with everything Artemis.
Mm-hmm. And you said the wilderness, the protector of the wilderness, or from the wilderness. Inside this area right here, the sanctuary, is a sacred grove of Diana.
Oh, beautiful.
And a lot of the myths, some of the myths we're going to explore today take place in her sacred grove.
Well, I forgot to say that where she lands at Delos, right, is supposed to be a grove, right? Where they originally give birth, it's supposed to be an oak grove. And in some stories, it's not at Delos. She lands at Orthia, which is like a famous shrine in the in Anatolia, I believe. And again, they land in this sacred grove, right? And at Ephesus, you have this. The spot there is done at the grove site, where her temple is set up. So she's intimately connected with that wildness, right?
hmm And and so here you see the lake, Lake Nemi. One of the terms for it was called the Mirror of Diana, and they would do processions around the lake. This is called the Nemeralia, or the Hecatean Ides. So it's dedicated to Hecate as well, when they do the torch processions. And there's a little more to this, with Rex Nemerensis and Diana Nemerensis. And that's Nemi of the lake, the goddess of the lake there, or the grove, and Rex Nemerensis. Do you want to tell the story of Rex Nemerensis?
I'm not as familiar with it.
Okay. Well, with that one, that's the king. Okay, so it's Rex Nemerensis. He's chosen to be a king, the leader for 3 days. It's a fake king, a faux king, and can tell people what to do. And then after that, he's sacrificed.
Oh, okay. I did come across a little bit of this. That's so wild.
And that's the high priest of Diana. It's called the Rex Nemerensis, and that's Diana Nemerensis at the lake there. And it's a wild story. Like I said, for a couple of days you get to be the boss, but after 3 days you're sacrificed.
That parallels. It makes me think of the Saturnalia, right? Which is another Roman festival where no one dies at the end of the Saturnalia. But what happens in the Saturnalia is you have that flipping of the roles where slaves become freedmen, and children get to boss their parents around, and they would elect the the king of Saturnalia, who would be usually a slave, who would be treated like a king for the day and paraded around. And then at the end of the week of Saturnalia, everything would go back to normal. But people had to invite their slaves in and feast them, and they had to treat their kids with respect and their wives with respect. That was a big deal in Saturnalia, when normally the men didn't have to do that.
Mm-hmm. That's right. So people are familiar, probably, if they're thinking Artemis. Let's go to the next image right here. All right, a famous image of Artemis hunting, holding a deer. They'll call it a stag, maybe, with their bow and their arrows. This is one of the most famous symbols of Artemis, is the bow. In a lot of statues or ancient vases and pottery, iconography, you'll see her holding that bow.
Well, this particular image is really famous because it's also connected to a lot of these stories, where there would be this whole thing with in Iphigeneia, Toroi or Tori, they have to go steal the statue of Artemis, and she's carved out of wood and depicted like this. And this becomes like a very important image that's replicated. I'm trying to remember who said it. I think it's Pausanias. He talks about at one of these temples, there's a 6-foot tall version who looks like this, standing guard at the entrance to the temple.
Oh, yeah. And so from here, we're going to look into some of these versions. And you mentioned them earlier. Orthia, Bratania, Ephesus. These are different versions of Artemis, but always going back to the huntress, the goddess.
So just wanted to add.
Oh, you're right. He escaped alive.
Yeah. So
yeah, right. Okay. Correct me. Yes.
Thank you for the correction. We really appreciate it. Thanks.
So. Yeah. And if I remember, now that I remember back, I thought he had to kill the previous priest to take over the job. That's how you would take over to be the next Rex Nemerensis. You would have to kill him. And in this one, somebody out there posted and looked it up. He gets to escape.
Lucky. Yeah, they were saying it's the center myth to the Golden Bough, right?
Good. So let's hit the next pick.
Or starting point, I should say.
So here's an Etruscan version, bronze statue of Artemis holding a spear, not the bow, but the spear. Because I want to see if there's any ancient Etruscan ones. And she's also holding a philae, the bull.
Beautiful, right? For the Dionysian fertility rites and the Great Mother rites.
Exactly. So hit the next pick. And right here's another version I found of Artemis on a wall where she has her bow and she's holding the philae. And what she would be doing right there is pouring a libation onto the bull before they sacrifice it. It's part of, the sacrificial version of the cup or the bowl, what they would use it for to drink out of. Go to the next pic. That's what it would look like right there. But that could also be blood, mind you. It's so, yeah, and they would pour the sacrifice onto it. In some versions, Artemis has that bowl as well. Besides the bow and arrow or the spear, she has a bowl. Now we're going to talk about another festival called the Manchia Festival. And I don't know if you remember in previous episodes, we talked about the Arctoi, which were the little bear cubs. Yeah. And these were initiates and young girls. When they reached a certain age at puberty, they would go to the temple and learn how to dance like little bear cubs.
We'll be getting even more into it with some sources, but there's a couple things that we talked about that I went and found the sources on from previous episodes to expand on, so that'll be fun. And one of them is the Arctoi from the Baronia, which is a festival to Artemis, where it's like, I was asking Ammon about it because I was having trouble fully understanding the image, but this idea is that women between the ages of 3 and 5, and then again right before marriage, every woman had to, at least before they got married, had to go through this rite where they embodied the bear, and they would wear saffron robes, and they would have to dance and act and become the bear. And there's all these illusions that you have to scare Artemis off and protect yourself from Artemis, because she doesn't want you to grow up. She doesn't want you to get laid. And if you break chastity, she'll kill you. So you embody the bear to scare away that unconscious anger, that resentment of growing up. Like, it's wild. It's so interesting.
Well, in one of these festivals, they would carry around little moon cakes, looking like phylades and with honey. And they would put a candle in the middle, and it almost looked like little birthday cakes, called the Manchia Festival, the little Arctois. And they had these little psychoactive cakes. It's part of the ritual. I think I have a picture we'll see later, but since this picture is up, I'm going to explain this picture right here. This is the 9 muses in Artemis. Because in some of the myths, Artemis would lead the 9 muses in dance or chants.
That's so beautiful.
So if you would count, you would have the 9 muses and Artemis in the back with her bow, leading them, inspiring the muses to get them jump-started to prophesize. Yet she doesn't necessarily prophesize. She hunts.
No, she doesn't. She's the hunter. It's a bit different, right? Apollo is the prophesier. He's the one who gives divination. But, she has a different role, equally as important. She brings the wildness. She has what she does have is she has her virgin hunters who are with her, also like her, chaste and, in that age of blossoming. And these are the most, they're all Amazonian giants, the way they describe them.
Yeah.
And scary.
Yep.
I also wanted to point out oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I'm sorry to cut you off. Go for it.
I was just going to point out that another interesting thing this makes me think about is our friend Gandhi was sending me some Hecate stuff that came late. So it didn't make it some of it didn't make it in my presentation. And one of the things that stood out was in the PGM, they call Hecate the leader of the muses. But in that same one, they're also calling Hecate Selene, and they call Hecate Artemis. In this particular PGM spell, it's like 2 Selene, but then you read it and it's mostly about Hecate. It's really interesting, And
I don't know if you could see it. Maybe if we zoomed in, if someone were to zoom in, she might even have the little horns. Sometimes they'll put on Artemis. You'll see them very subtle.
Yeah, she has
like a little moon, and it looks like a hairpin. It's like a crescent moon, and it stands for the horns. Sometimes it stands for the moon, for the Selene aspect, but other times it's the Taurian aspect of the bull, the Tauropolos.
Yeah, she's the Tauropolos, right? One of her earliest names, epithets. Yeah. Wow. Interesting.
So let's hit the next pic. Right here, I knew I had a picture. One of these moon cakes, the birthday cakes. I think they're called amphifontos, and it means something to do with shining. And they would carry these around, these psychoactive birthday cakes, if you could call it that. They've graduated to be women in this one festival, the Monchia Festival.
Wow. That's so cool. I love it.
You
Interesting.
know, and they would put honey. And so we've talked about it could be a psychoactive honey, it could be psychoactive breads.
Well, we know they were doing that with at the crossroads. They did sometimes leave psychoactive stuff for the dogs, but then they also had the feasts of Hecate, and they would give away food to the poor. So there's a lot going on with the feasting in Hecate. It's a big deal, and there are many layers. Part of it is a drug right, not dismissing that, but also part of it was a soup kitchen. And part of it was just a family feast where you're begging Hecate not to curse your women.
Yeah.
Right.
And I'm glad you said dogs, because dogs are part of it. Dogs are part of, when you see Artemis, wherever you see Artemis painting or statue, look at the bottom corner of the picture or the statue, and a lot of times you're going to see a little dog there.
Yeah, she's always associated with the dogs, her hunting companions.
So hit the next pic. All right, so I want to get into some Artemis myths that are told. And right here is Medea and Jason. And the reason I bring up Medea and Jason is because she calls on Artemis at a certain point.
Oh wow, where and which retelling of the tale? And yeah,
for vengeance, it deals with vengeance. Yeah, and so here you have Jason getting the fleece and the snake in the cup right there with that's Medea right there, Medea and Jason. Because and also in another part of the myth, I don't know if you remember, Medea dresses up as an old lady, and she carries a statue of Artemis to the gate.
This is a big deal. I'll get into it. It turns out, okay, not only are the virginal young girls, the blossoming girls, fortune, like, can tell the fortune and stuff, but there's this story, I have a source for it, where at one point one of these priestesses gets assaulted and gets attacked for her beauty. So then Artemis decrees that elder women who have passed their prime and can no longer conceive and who have sworn off men can also be these divining oracles. And so you get this tradition of these oracular crones. It's quite interesting.
Well, in here, that foreshadows it. You have Medea holding the Artemis, dressed up as an old lady to enter the gates, to do her hoo-ha in magic. We won't have to get into all the stories of the Golden Fleece and Jason and Medea, but she prays to Artemis and she dresses up and carries the statue, like I said. Go to the next pic.
Yeah, it seems that it's the chastity more than anything that is paramount, with Artemis. Not so much the virginity is also important, but it's that youthfulness, and it's that refraining from intercourse with men.
Mm-hmm. In that last pic, you had Medea holding the cup to the snake at the tree, and in some parts of the story, either Jason's anointed with the oil, and in another part of the story, they either throw the oil onto the snake to put it to sleep. In that version, you could see that the snake is taken from the cup and gets high off it and passes out. I found this interesting philae right here that has the head of Medusa on it. So this would be held in your hand, and you would pour a ritual libation in it. I'm just throwing it in there because we're going to talk about Medea, I think, in the next week, huh?
Next
so
week,
I just wanted to throw some Medea and Artemis symbology in right now, just to program your subconscious. So let's hit the next pic. All right, so we'll get into some stories. Acteon is one of the myths, where he sneaks up. Artemis is bathing. So if we didn't even get into a lot about the Artemis symbologies and histories and myths, but Artemis kicks it in the woods, in the forest, normally with women. She doesn't have a dude. They're all virgins, and they go hunting, and they lead a perfectly good lifestyle. They don't need men, but there are men that stalk them. And in one of these versions, he sneaks up to catch her bathing, and so she turns him into a deer.
Yep, and then he is prey to be hunted, right? And he's hunted down by her dogs, which are these female priestesses, right?
Well, and one of the myths, or one of the versions, he's hunted down by his own dogs. His own dogs get him. And you know what's funny? See his hand, what his hand is pointing to? He has a little, it's almost like, it looks like a fillet.
Yeah, it does.
He has to have, and it's funny because in all these images, you'll see a lot of people holding fillets. It's just a thing back in ancient times. So let's hit the next pic. Here's another version of him on an Etruscan tomb where he's getting torn apart by the dogs.
Wow.
You can see right there, and it's his own dogs that tear him apart because they think he's a deer. And that's what he gets for sneaking up on Artemis taking a bath.
Those being ripped apart myths is super symbolic within the Greek, right? Like, you cannot forget that Dionysus is ripped apart by the Titans. Phanes is ripped apart at the beginning of creation. You know, Pentheus is ripped apart by the Maenads. Orpheus is ripped apart by the Maenads. The Homophagia is the center right of the Maenads, where they would rip apart a sacrificial animal and consume its live flesh. Right?
Mm-hmm. Go hit the next pic. Right there. Here's another version of that, where he's getting torn apart by her dogs, her female priestesses, the Maenads, and he's wearing a crocus robe. So I want to start pointing that out because we talked about that earlier. You brought that up, how they were wearing crocus robes.
Saffron, yeah.
Saffron, yeah, crocus. It produces a color that's, I think the priestess of Hecate had it. The priestess of Cybele had these colored robes. And we'll start to see it through some other imageries. So let's go to the next picture. All right, here's another one. And she has her robe as well. Iphigenia.
Purple. Wow, yeah, Iphigenia.
Well, and that's the father right there, Agamemnon, wearing his purple robe. And she has this yellow or orange robe as well, being torn off. It's part of the symbology. A robe, that yellow or orange robe has to be torn off. Up in the sky, you see the stag and the bow.
Yeah.
And what happened was, once again, he went hunting and he killed a deer in the sacred grove Artemis. So she got pissed and she said, "You have to kill your daughter."
This is a really important story. It's super prominent and kind of retold in many different iterations and variations. Not always the same, and they take on different character. Most famous of the retellings, of course, is Euripides' Iphigenia at Tori, where they tell this version that's being depicted here, where, you know, like you said, Agamemnon kills so what happens is, after the fall of the Battle of Troy, Agamemnon kills a deer while they are cleaning up and getting ready to go. And then Artemis is like, "No, I'm going to curse you guys. You're never going to make it home. I demand a sacrifice." And he goes and he's prepared to sacrifice his daughter, you know. And there's iterations, like in the Oresteia, right? She's killed, and that leads to the events at the Oresteia. But in Iphigeneia at Toroi, there's a different thing that happens. What happens is, at the last second, just before Iphigenia is to be killed, she's turned into a deer, and she's really been transported to the temple of Artemis at Toroi, which is like this Amazonian stronghold, and she gets to be the queen priestess there.
Yeah. Or in another version, she's transported to Luke, that island in the Black Sea with the island of the snakes, the White Island or Shining Island, and she marries Achilles.
Yep. And yeah, we're going to get into it, but for sure it's definitely paralleling the story of Abraham and Isaac, right? I was talking to Ammon about this and we were laughing. You know, it's very clear that this kind of we even see earlier iterations of it. I got a couple quotes from the Suda, which we'll talk about. There's this character who he basically agrees to do it, to kill his daughter for the promise of having the priesthood for life. But at the last moment, he substitutes it for a goat dressed up like his daughter, you know? And then they kill the goat and the plague still ends. So they all go, Artemis must have loved it. So from then on, that family is now in charge of the sacrifice and they don't have to sacrifice virgins anymore, right? But we'll get into it more when we see the source. It's pretty wild.
If you notice behind the Agamemnon wearing purple is Hecate holding two torches.
Right. That's so beautiful. Really small there with two dogs. Is it?
Yeah,
two
yeah.
dogs.
Yep.
Amazing.
So yeah, symbology in these paintings. So hit the next pick.
That's so incredible.
You know what's funny? There was another version as well. Hesiod. It's called the Hesiodic Catalog of Women.
Right. Pseudo Hesiod, yeah.
Yeah. And he calls her Iphimedeia.
Yeah, Iphimedeia.
Iphimedeia, yeah. And he transforms her, Artemis transforms her into Hecate in that version. So that's why they're interconnected. It's all interconnected.
Yeah, it's so interconnected. And when I asked Ammon mentioned this in the Hecate stream, that Iphi means like senior. So it really is implying that she's the Iphimedeia means she's the mother of Medea.
Right. So we'll explore that next week. That's why I wanted to connect this together: Medea, Hecate, and Artemis.
Right. Beautiful.
And this one here is Lycaon, the king. We talked about him in the Lycaon games before.
Absolutely.
I brought this image because this will tie into it all as well. What happened was he tried to feed his son to Zeus, and cannibalism. Zeus figured it out, turned him into a wolf. And in some versions, he's a hero. In some versions, it's a curse. But he had a daughter, Callistos. Go to the next image. I think I have one of that. Yeah, there's Callistos. And so with the Callistos story, she was one of the huntresses with Artemis. She was one of her virgin hunting priestesses. And one day Zeus turns himself into Artemis to seduce her, gets her pregnant. And then finally, in the bath one day, Artemis realizes that she's pregnant. She says, "Hey, who did this to you?" And she says, "You did it. Don't you remember?"
Oh my God.
It makes Artemis mad. Artemis turns her into a deer. Oh no, a bear. That's when Artemis turns her into a bear.
Wild.
And this is one of the myths of the she-bears. We're talking about the Ark toy.
Yep. Such a huge deal for Artemis, the Ark toy.
And if you notice right there, once again, she has the robe, the color of that robe on. It's that crocus robe. That has to be, and so you'll see the crocus robe on all, in these different what do you call the Renaissance paintings, the later paintings. They'll add in those symbologies that these figures that get transformed by Artemis into animals. A lot of them have a crocus robe on. They have to be disrobed before they make that change into the animal or into their next being or whatever, their next incarnation, let's say. So, yeah.
Interesting.
So let's go to the next one. Since we're talking about the bears. There it is right there. And they found these at the Brauon in Attica. And they had a festival, the Braunia.
The Baronia, yeah.
Yeah, Baronian. Say it correctly. Thank you. The sanctuary of Artemis. And they used to have a festival where the girls, they come of age. They'd be sent there to do these dances like bears. little she bears, and they'd wear crocus robes or sometimes naked. It's part of the rituals. We actually discussed it in previous episodes. The Arctoid, the she bears, and that's one of the what we were talking about before. Callistos is one of the origins of the myths of how it connects to Artemis and the bears. And in some versions, they had to kill bears and sacrifice bears. And a lot of the versions, in the original versions, there's a sacrifice. Human sacrifice, or a bear sacrifice, or an animal sacrifice. And so what a lot of authors are going to say is at a certain point in these Artemis cults, they went from human sacrifice to animal sacrifice to just blood on the altar. And that's through whipping and through ritualized blood.
Yeah, we see that specifically in the Spartan tradition. And I'll show you some sources.
Oh yeah, good. We'll hit the next pic. And so right there, that's one of the images they found there of the young Arctoid, the she bears, and with their crocus robes,
doing the bear games, right?
Doing the bear games, yeah, little bear games, and it deals with the sacrifice of the bear, and coming of age as women and hunting bear, and men weren't allowed in here, and they do dances and songs, and in some of them, like I said, they would throw off the rope. That was part of the thing of coming of your untamed presence. You throw off the robe and become wild. Is one of the myths. So, since you were talking about Sparta, let's go to the next pic. I think I have one of those. And here's one of these mistress of the beasts.
Yeah, Patera Medusa. This is
and here she'll be holding the animals and she'll be winged. You'll see Artemis with wings in a lot of the frescoes.
The Oretheia. This is a very common, especially among the earliest images that we have in Greece. I have some examples that we'll look at. Yeah, they call it the Oretheia. And Artemis was originally connected with Adrasteia, like the star. So there's a lot going on here with the flying. And that imagery, though, gets less and less as she becomes more and more associated with the wilderness and with the transitions between womanhood to to marriage and whatnot.
Well, hit the next pic. Right here, we used this in a previous episode. This is from Sparta. This is a recreation of one of those whipping rituals. In one of the versions, the boys would have to run up to the altar and grab cheese as they were getting whipped and not make a sound. And the boy that got the most psychoactive cheeses would have honor. And they would sing songs to him. He'd be famous. He'd have a little garland. He'd probably get a little headband and all of his cheeses to take home and street cred. And plus your scars are street cred too.
Well, there's two versions, right? Well, I brought some sources we'll look at later. In one of the versions, right, they have to steal the food and the cheese in order to survive, right? And you have all the men who are sleeping around in the temple. And then in another version, they're doing a similar rite of initiation where they have to stand in front of the temple and get whipped. And the first person to basically you can scream, but it has to be a manly scream. If you cry or you break, then you fail and you're treated like dirt. But whoever survives the longest is the most beloved, Yeah. And sometimes they even blame the whippers when the whippers don't whip hard enough.
Oh, yeah, right. Exactly. And, and you can see the priestess right there is holding a version of Artemis. It's the liminal version, the liminatus. It's no arms. And they found it in a marsh or in the reeds, and the plants had grown around it and kept it afloat. It's part of the name. But they also deal with sacrifices too. A lot of weird in the Spartan version. There's sacrifices. I remember we talked about the other Spartan games where the little boys at a certain age take off their clothes, swim across the lake, and go into the woods and act like little wolves.
Yep. And then they have to go hunt a hippo. They got to hunt one of those. What do they call them? The Anyway, they got to hunt their slaves. You know, they have a whole group of slaves. I think it's the Hippolytes or whatever.
Yeah, the Hippolytes, which are a class of Greek citizens that have a lower class, and if they have too much, you can like it's basically calling from the herd. The herd, you know, you would attack them, rape their women, steal from them, and then run back into the woods screaming like wolves, howling. You know, was a thing, and so the rituals are pretty wild. So in the Spartan one, we had the ones with Artemis, the whipping rituals, and also the Tauropolis, because that's connected to this region we'll get into in a second. And this was also, I remember we did the episode, the Diamastigosis.
Yeah, on the whip, yeah.
Yeah, they loved it. It's part of their initiations. So let's hit the next pick. You know, and also they would do in those rituals, when the girls would come of age, they would cut their hair, a lock of their hair, and they would dedicate to Artemis. Because at that point, they were going to move on to a different goddess. So when you're 16, up to that point, or whatever the age was, you're with the virginal goddess of the hunt. At the next point, when you cut your hair and gave it to Artemis, you're ready to move on to Aphrodite or a different goddess, because now you're going to get married.
Yeah, you're going to have sex.
Yeah. So you need, Artemis is like, it's cool. We're cool now. You need a different patron or mentor, let's say.
Right.
And, you know, since we're talking a little about the Orthian element, I'll throw this in once again, the Villa of Mysteries. I'm going to keep showing this image because it's important. That's why they wanted it intact, and that's why it was painted. It was to walk somebody through this initiation process. And part of the initiation process was this winged goddess, the Artemis Orthia, with the whip, the oistress, causing the burning purple to spin and come out of her vulvic area, and the lady that's getting whipped is part of the initiation, the bridegroom.
Right. Wow.
And this was intact, found at the Villa of Mysteries, and it's part of an initiation. So, and people say this is the Artemis whipping her. But it's part of a Dionysic initiation as well. So it combines a lot of the elements together. And if you saw the frescoes, by the end of it, she's enthroned as the maiden, as the mother on a seat. She's gone through all the elements, and now she's sitting on the seat. So, you know, so let's move on to a couple more picks. Boom. So, Artemis of Ephesus. Because we started at Delos and went to Italy, and then came over to Greece and want to go to Turkey, Anatolia. Because we find Artemis there too, in a different form. And before I read this, I'll even preface what was going on. Paul had came to town and got into a big fight with the silversmiths because they're making idols to Artemis out of silver, you know, the silversmiths. And at a certain point, the whole town gets riled up. And they're all chanting. Thousands of people at once are chanting, Artemis is great. Artemis of Ephesus is great. They just keep chanting over and over. So finally, they have to have a big meeting in the theater, in the town's theater, amphitheater. They call everyone in. And here I'll read from Acts 19:35. And it says, when the town clerk had quieted the crowd, he said to them, men of Ephesus, who is there who does not know that the city of the Ephesians is temple keeper of the great Artemis and of the sacred stone that fell from the sky? So Artemis, they have that sacred stone as well. We talked about the sacred stone in the past couple episodes, those black stones and meteorites that they worshipped.
The beetle.
Yeah. And this is part of Artemis worship in this form there at Ephesus. You know, I was even looking up versions of Acts of John with the beloved John.
Oh, wow.
We know that the beloved John ends up there because he's the one that's not martyred out of the other disciples, Jesus' lover. So, well, let's hit the next pick. Maybe we'll rehash the story a little bit. Oh, there you go. You have that's at the Cyprus Island, Aphrodite, the temple of Aphrodite. That's the black stone that fell down for Aphrodite.
Yep, the beetle.
Yeah, the betel stone, and also used in the Cybele worship. And it's also used in Artemis worship as well there at Ephesus. Go to the next pick.
Yeah, there's a lot of these statues are said to have fallen from the sky. Not all of them did fall from the sky. That
Right.
was often just something they claimed in order to inspire the idol, but that was would make it pristine, and they would often incorporate elements of the meteorites into statues as well and stuff. They were trying to make these idols, these eidolon, the most beautiful thing possible, right?
Oh, they
The
would
most
shine them up too.
magical. What's right?
They would shine them up too, really
Oh,
shiny.
absolutely. They'd be shiny and painted and bright. Like they looked more like Tamil temples you see today than these white alabaster things that they put on display in the museum.
Right, right. So here's one, because we talked about the Kaaba before, and the Betel stone, and the black stone that fell from the sky. You saw right there in Acts. There's Muhammad. Here's a tapestry where he would put it on the fabric, and they carried it over to the Kaaba stone, and they're going to put it in the side of the Kaaba. Um, it's a famous myth in Islam, but you can see that it's central to Islam too. Is that black stone that fell from the sky? It deals with, like I said, Cybele or Artemis, depending, different versions. So let's hit the next pick.
Or a lot, right?
A lot. Yeah.
Lots of time.
There's the black stone in the side of the Kaaba right there, in a vagina, a metallic vagina, and supposedly it's held together by frankincense. That's a bunch of stones right there that is falling apart over the years, and they hold it together with that's compacted frankincense, holding about 8 stones together into an oval omphalos style stone. Let's say. So go to the next pick. All right, so I want to talk about the beloved John a little bit because he's famous in the Christian myths for destroying the temple of Artemis, the
Yeah.
great seventh wonder of the world there. So we might as well give you a little backstory about the beloved John. Here he is on the lap of Jesus because that was his beloved, he said. He said he was going to drink the cup along with him. There you
Yeah.
can see he has, I don't know if it's alabastron or a scroll, because we know that they ate scrolls, and we showed you that. And the alabastrons they did other things with. Here, you can see he's getting very comfortable with his lover.
Remember, because Jesus says that the twins, right? John and James are going to be the left and right. They're the sons of thunder. They're his right and left hands to the most important of his disciples. So,
Boanerges. And some people say that has mushroom connotations in it. It's supposed to be an Aramaic phrase. These sons of thunder who have a special relationship, especially James, and a lot of the iconography is never wearing a beard. Some will say there's some hermaphrodite stuff going on there. We know throughout the myths, like I said, he said he's going to drink the cup along with them. He's going to sit at the right hand with them. His mother is Mary Salome,
right?
who commands Jesus and gives him commands and tells him, "Hey, my son's got to be there with you." And at the night before the crucifixion at the garden, when things go down, they have to stand watch. Different things happen. After the boy in the garden, the little naked boy with the sindon that runs away, he's arrested. Jesus, and they go to court. Well, John's the only one that's allowed to go because he has a special relationship with the high priest. Remember, the mother, Mary Salome, had a group of boats, and we did episodes on his mother being a type of a goddess or goddess priestess of the goddess traditions there. After this, they go to the crucifixion, and here's what was leading all this backstory up to. At the crucifixion, Jesus says down to his mom and Mary and John and says, "This is your new son. He's your new son. This is your new mother." And so go to the next pick.
Wow.
So in the traditions, he takes Mary with him to Ephesus.
Right, he does. I remember this.
And this is a painting based on one of these traditions where he becomes the new. It's in the Johannine tradition. We've talked about the Johannine Christianity that says that the beloved John is the Christ, a form of a Christ, coming from the previous John the Baptist, who's a form of Christ, an earlier Christ. And there's people that believe that up to this day, and they worship. It's in the Johannine tradition. And he goes to Ephesus. Now, when he goes to Ephesus, a lot of wild things happen. And if you look, you could look it up in Acts of John, which is a apocryphal version. Along with him destroying the temple. That's one of the famous versions, that he destroys the temple of Artemis. And they're having a celebration for Artemis. And he walks in wearing all black, and they're wearing all white. And the icon shakes and it breaks and falls down. And that's the famous story. But there's more to the Acts of John in Ephesus. It's pretty wild. I had never read much of it, but I went through a lot of it this weekend. In one of the versions, there's a story of Drusiana, a woman who dies, and one of his followers that becomes his devotee, tries to have sex with the dead body at the tomb.
Oh, wow.
He says, if I'm not going to get you in life, I'm going to get you in death. And this is one of the major stories in Acts of John, is having sex with the dead bodies. Well, he eventually raises the bodies up. And that person becomes his disciple, the person that tries to have sex with the dead body. And in another version, in the Acts of John, there's a young man who castrates himself. And that becomes the beloved John's disciple from there on. He says that they're connected from that point on. And you'll see this in a lot of iconography. When he writes his gospels and stuff, you'll see that there's a young boy always next to him that was castrated in the Acts of John at Ephesus. And it deals with the Artemis temple. All the stories revolve around the Artemis temple. But I just wanted to throw that in there because it's connected in the Bible, this Artemis in the black stone. So let's hit the next pick. Oh, there he is right there. And that's where the story takes place, with the snakes in the cup, and the poisons, and the dipsass. A lot of the good stuff takes place in Acts of John.
Wow.
You'll see these things taking place. So get the next pick. Right there. So Ephesus, Artemis. So we started off with one version of Artemis that had a bow. Now we're at a version of Artemis that's black, like a black stone from the sky, and has, some people can say they're beehives, some people can say they're breasts, some people can say they're bull's balls, some people can say they're anything else.
Oh, there's so many different ones. A lot of people think they're related to drugs of some kind. And there's some kind of insect sac, related sometimes to wasps rather than bees. But yeah.
Yep. And that's the famous statue there. And it was one of the 7 wonders of the world, the temple there that was destroyed by the beloved John. Artemis of Ephesus. Go to the next pick. I think I have one more pick. There you go. This is from Italy.
It's a much later tradition.
Yeah. But I just wanted to show them in action, the lactognosis.
It's awesome. I am going to point out, so there's this amazing book I read for this episode, and I also talked to her in an earlier episode, if people want to check that out, Dr. Carla Ionescu. And her, professional interpretation as a historian of all this is that it is not breasts. This is a much later and Romanized version. If we look here, right, this is a recreation, but on the original statue, these bulbs were not black. The skin of the goddess is black. If these were breasts, they would be black. Her feet are also black. If you were to zoom out, and we would, and there's all this bee imagery associated with Artemis at Ephesus. Her priesthood are called the worker bees, the drones, so I just wanted to point it out. This doesn't mean this is entirely illegitimate. I think traditions can grow and evolve, and it's beautiful. But we also have to acknowledge this earlier tradition is not really 100% this.
So if we're going on bees, I would go with bees for a few reasons, because of Çatal Yük and the Göbekli Tepes. and a lot of the bee iconographies there, as well as Trapezon Res, which is the doorway to Colchis, which is where they have the hallucinogenic honey with the rhododendron honey, which is right there. Remember, it got the Greek army higher. One of our Alexandrian's army, one of those armies got high off that honey. You know, it's right there. And they had the hallucinogenic dreamfish of Abraham. We talked about that at the Abraham's pool, which is just right around the block from there. A lot of stuff going on in Anatolia.
Absolutely. Anatolia is where it's at, right? Georgia is where wine is first discovered, you know, and this kind of sets off a lot of that mystery cult world. So yeah, it's really interesting. But thank you, Dion, for that incredible presentation. Is there any last things you want to tie up your end of the story with before I begin my part?
Not at all. Have at it.
Okay, that was amazing. Thank you so much. So much fun. So I just wanted to first point out some of the sources that I used. I mostly used ancient sources, and we'll cite them directly, but there were two books that really informed this presentation that I think people need to read because they were just so effing good. If you want to learn about Artemis, there's a lot of terrible books out there, but these two are where it's at. First, Stephanie Budden, Artemis. She cites everything. She goes through so many incredible sources from all across history, from all across the Mediterranean, really in depth. And then, of course, Dr. Carla's book, She Who Hunts, which is equally as in depth, but has a lot of, they contrast each other. They're really good reads together. And yeah, I absolutely love them. So we've lost Dion for a second, but yeah, he will be back. We will begin here. First, I wanted to talk about in Carla's book, she begins by talking about the ancient roots of Artemis and where she could have arisen from. And Dr. Carla connects it directly to the Egyptian tradition. And she specifically uses two gods. The first god is Neith. And this god, she cites Herodotus, who talks about a Neith sanctuary. He compares Neith to Athena, but a lot of the rites can equally sound like Artemis, you know, and it's really interesting. There's she is this goddess of the night, of the hunt, of starry heaven, and she also carries the bow and the arrows. Okay, and then another goddess that Dr. Carlin mentions is the Egyptian Bastet. And she cites two different things with Herodotus, where Herodotus talks about how in one of the stories, Artemis is transformed into a cat, and she becomes a cat fully embodied in Egypt. And like, this is one of these ancient mythological stories that they're telling. And then they're also comparing some of these rites at Bubastis, the city in Egypt, in Herodotus, to the rites that you would see in the Greek temples of Artemis. So the Greeks had this connection explicitly with Bastet, whereas they saw, at least Herodotus saw this as more as Athena. Now, we need to recognize that these distinctions are very limited and really depend on where you are in Greece, you know. So a different person in a different part of Greece may have saw Artemis instead of Athena, you know. So
if I could say one thing real quick, how John destroyed the temple of Artemis.
Okay.
When Jesus is taken to Egypt, they go to Proboscis, and he just destroys the temple of Bast.
Oh, wow.
Remember? Yeah, we talked about that in one of the stories, because when the Holy Family does the round, it's part of the Coptic holy sites. And at Proboscis, Jesus goes there, and the same thing happens. The statues fall down, the statue of Bast.
The statue of Bast falls down. So it's like another thing. He's going out and attacking and trying to destroy the mother goddess. That's so wild. And where that was at Bubastis, and this is Jesus.
Yep. Yeah, Bubastis or Probast.
Okay.
Yep, so and that's on the route of the Holy Family into Egypt.
Right. So I also wanted to show you guys this here. So This comes to us from the Minoan civilization. This is the linear B. And the linear B is highly contested. There is if we look here right in the middle, you will see Artemis or Atimiti. And later on in the linear B, you'll see Atimita. And they wonder if these are two distinct gods or the same god. But it says here, to Artemis offer 1 unit of oregano. To the sweepers of the temple offer 1 unit of E. They're not sure what E is. But she's referenced at least twice by this kind of name. And there's a lot of debate about whether or not this refers explicitly to Artemis, but also within the linear B, you do have that Patera, right? Which Dion had showed us the picture earlier of. And so that relates to her as that mistress of the wilderness, you know, and we're seeing that there's an ancient Greek tradition as well as kind of like this Egyptian tradition that is informing a lot of the Artemis story. And then on the other side, when I was reading that other book, Stephanie talks about how it connects to a lot of the more localized Mediterranean or Middle Eastern traditions. So this is Nanaya, and this is a goddess with the wings and who's of starry heaven and often contains a bow and arrow. And later on, you'll even get Greek versions of her, right? Where
Nana.
there's a kind of
some say Nana or Nana. Yeah,
Nana?
I was looking up that one as one of the older Sumerian versions.
Right? This is not a Greek statue, but look at this. We've seen so many of the horn moon as that symbol of Artemis. And look at her on full display here, right? It's beautiful. And then look at this. We have Ishtar, the goddess Ishtar. What does she have? A big cat, right? A lion that wings, you know, the weapons, the bow, the arrows, the horns, right? And we have the moon, the full moon. So really interesting connections, you know. This here is from, I believe it's the 9th or 8th century. It's debatable, but it comes to us from Sparta. And this is a version of that Artemis or Thea, Artemis with the wings, you know. And you can see how it kind of looks like those versions of Nana, right? And here we have this is a bigger version of what you were showing, Dion, of the Patera, which becomes syncretized with this Artemis or Thea, you know. And here we have another version of this is a relief of a Pythos from Thebes that shows a nature goddess with her children. And there's some debate over exactly who this is, but most scholars contend that it is a version of Artemis Agotera, Artemis of the wilderness. And this one is explicitly Artemis of the wilderness, Agotera, of the hunt. And here you see her with all of these swastikas, these whirling stars. And you have the dogs, you have a bull, you have a fish, and you have 2 swans. Another image that you didn't touch on that is really connected to her in the earliest traditions is the swan, which we also know is an image related to Zeus. This is something I wanted to show too, which is kind of fun. Here we get the Holy Family, Leto, the mother, she's carrying Apollo, and then Artemis is here, and Artemis is the one protecting them from Python. And we know later on in the story, when Apollo grows up, he will come back and with the help of Artemis, kill Python, right? So, beautiful. Here we have Artemis with the swan, feeding the swan. This one I thought you guys were going to really, really love. You'll get a kick out of this, Dion. So here we have Artemis with the wings, or Thea, carrying 2 swans, and look what it is. This is an alabastron. This would be used to carry oil and would also be used as an applicator, you know, for women. So, wow. Just wild, eh? And here we have the classic, more famous image that we associate with Artemis. Here she's wearing the young girl's dress. She has her bow, the deer, and she's on the hunt, you know. And I wanted to include this. This is an Etruscan gem that we have. And again, she's carrying the bow. She's carrying a dog, and she has a deer in the background. And this one comes to us from Northern Africa, right? She has a ton of it. There are tons and tons of shrines related to Artemis from across North Africa. And I really wanted to point this out because you get these more Black depictions of Artemis and Apollo, right? Showing you this multicultural kind of imagery of these characters. And here we have, this was the temple at Ephesus. This is a reconstruction that was based on, descriptions we have of what the temple looked like and all of its columns. And here's a recreation of another version. This is a recreation that's at the Louvre that I found. And it was actually recreated in the Greek era by Greek artists trying to be in that tradition of Ephesus. And the hands are removed. The hands used to be black meteorite in this one. So now I'm going to go to a bunch of the text. I wanted to... Do you have anything to comment on the pictures or anything, Dion?
Amazing.
Love it, eh? Pretty wild with the alabastron, eh? Showing that she is also with this kind of female magic related to childbirth, and the utilizing of these oils, right? So really beautiful. I wanted to do kind of a brief overview. She occurs a lot. So what's interesting about Artemis is she's not huge in a lot of the plays, but she does occur in Homer in a big way. And she's everywhere in terms of the temples. She's like one of the most ubiquitous goddesses, to the point where in the pre-Christian era, both Dr. Carla and Stephanie, the two authors I showed, were basically suggesting that while most scholars will talk about how Mithraism could have become the dominant religion within the Mediterranean, they were arguing that there was a very good chance that this Artemis Isis mother cult, this hybridized mother cult, Cybele, Artemis, Isis, could have actually challenged and defeated Christianity as well. So there were more bigger players at play than people think. But yeah, we're going to start. Sorry, go ahead.
From what I understand in the original plays, she's mentioned, but she's not brought on stage. Like, she doesn't have a character that comes on stage. It's only talked of. Like, oh, Artemis did this or Artemis did that. But she has a lesser role until she becomes having a dominating role.
Right. Exactly. It's interesting. It's like she's there, always there, but it's like, oftentimes when we're looking at the Greek stuff, we rely very heavily on the literature and the plays because, this is what we have access to. But like, for example, Hestia is one of the most important Greek gods. But if you were to just study the plays and the literature, you'd never know this. She's almost never mentioned. But you go into any group home, any person's house, they're going to have something to the goddess Hestia. She's the goddess of the hearth, the goddess of the home, the goddess of fire. And in the archaeological record, she's everywhere. So we really have to try to have this balanced approach, right? So let's start by talking about the Odyssey. So this is a really interesting one, I thought. It says, they threw off the veils that covered their heads and began to play at ball, while Nausicaa of the white arms sang for them. As the huntress Artemis, pourer of arrows, goes forth upon the mountains of Taygetus or Erymanthos to hunt wild boars or deer. And the wood nymphs, daughters of aegis-bearing Zeus, take their sport along with her. Then is Leto proud at seeing her daughter stand a full head taller than the others, and eclipse the loveliest amid a whole bevy of beauties. Even so did the untamed maiden outshine her handmaidens. right? So she's that giant virgin huntress with all of these nymph hunters with her. So this comes to us from the Homeric hymns. There are 2 Homeric hymns that are dedicated to Artemis, and I wanted to share them with you. They're really short and pretty beautiful.
So in that previous one, I have one comment where it said um, she's the pourer of arrows. What her epitaph is, she's the lover of arrows.
Oh wow!
Not that she shoots them; she loves the arrows. There's an erotic connotation to it, or because it gives it more power.
Right.
Arrow has more power. It's like a shot from arrows. Like his arrows have power. So it's more than just an arrow. She's the lover of arrows.
That's beautiful. Amazing. That's true. She's the lover of arrows. So Homeric hymn to Artemis, number 9. Muse, sing of Artemis, sister of the far shooter, the virgin who delights in arrows. There we go, lover of arrows. Who was fostered with Apollo. She waters her horses from Meles deep in reeds, and swiftly drives her all golden chariot through Smyrna to the vine-clad Claros, where Apollo, god of the silver bow, sits waiting for the far-shooting goddess who delights in arrows. And so, hail to you, Artemis, in my song, and to all goddesses as well. Of you first I sing, and with you I begin. Now that I have begun with you, I will turn to another song. Beautiful, eh? So you really get that lover of arrows, connected to Apollo. She's that far shooter, right, who drives her chariot. You get a lot of that classic imagery we see with many goddesses here. So here's Homeric hymn 27. I sing of Artemis, whose shafts are of gold, who cheers on the hounds, the pure maiden, shooter of stags, who delights in archery, own sister to Apollo with the golden sword. Over the shadowy hills and windy peaks, she draws her golden bow, rejoicing in the chase, and sends out grievous shafts. The tops of the high mountains tremble, and the tangled wood echoes awesomely with the outcry of beasts. Earth quakes, and the seas also where fishes shoal. But the goddess with a bold heart turns every way, destroying the race of wild beasts. And when she is satisfied and has cheered her heart, this huntress who delights in arrows slackens her supple bow and goes to the great house of her dear brother Phoebus Apollo, to the rich land of Delphi, there to order the lovely dance of the muses and the graces. There she hangs up her curved bow and her arrows and heads and leads the dances, gracefully arrayed, while all they utter their heavenly voice, singing now neat ankled Leto bear children, supreme among the immortals both in thought and deed. Hail to you, children of Zeus and rich-haired Leto. And now I will remember you, and another song also. So we have that stuff that you were talking about, Dion, about that she's the leader of the muses, and she goes to Delphi to lead the dance.
Right, but she doesn't prophesize. She gets them started in that oistress and gets them spinning around.
Right? She's necessary to get them connected to that Apollonian power. But it's that Apollonian power that brings the inspiration, you know? It's interesting. All right, let's continue. So this here is the Orphic hymn to Artemis. And we know, like, the Orphic fragments, this is super occulted mystery stuff. So it says, of Artemis, frankincense, powder, incense. Hear me, O queen, many-named daughter of Zeus, titanic, sounding, glorious, archer, reverend, all-shining, torch-bearing goddess, Dictina, Locaea, aid to those in childbirth and untouched by childbirth. Lysizone, frenzy-loving huntress who drives away cares, swift arrow-pouring, wilds-loving, night-roaming, fame-bringing, gracious deliverer, tomboy. Orthea, giver of swift birth, divine Kutrophoros of mortals, immortal, earthly beast killing of blessed good fortune, you who dwell in the mountain dells, dear shooter, reverend, lady, all royal, fair sprout forever, sylvan puppy, Cadonian of changing form, come, dear goddess, savior, to all initiates, gracious, bringer of the fine fruits from the land, and lovely peace and fair tressed health, you lead to the mountain peaks, illnesses, and pain. What do you think of that one?
Like it. And you got a lot of the mythology tied up in that one verse right there.
Right? They're trying to pack you everything, right? And we have a lot of her most powerful epithets, a lot of her most powerful ideas. Dictina, the maiden, right? You have some of them I'm not as familiar with, unfortunately, sorry. Kuchophoros is the protector of children, right? So, and the nurse. So, lots of beautiful stuff here. Just amazing. So, this is the one I had talked about earlier from the Suda, where it's about talking about the bear stuff. So this is going to back up what you were showing with Artemis and the bears. So Suda Encyclopedia is a really interesting source text. It's an amazing book from the Byzantine era, and there's a lot of really cool stuff in it. And this goes, I am Emberos, weighty, meaning I am, sound of mind, thoughtful. Piraeus was previously an island. This, in fact, is how it got its name. From the crossing, Munkios, who possessed its headlands, established a shrine of Artemis Munkia, as you were talking about. After a she-bear appeared in it and was done away with by the Athenians, a plague or famine ensued, and the god prophesied the means of relieving it. Someone had to sacrifice his daughter to the goddess. Beros or Embaros was the only one who undertook to do so, on condition that his family hold the priesthood for life. He had his daughter adorned, but then hid her in the Aditon, and dressed a goat up in her clothing, and sacrificed it as though it were his daughter. Hence he gave rise to the proverb of the scapegoat. It is employed in reference to those who are addled and raving. Beautiful, eh? So you're getting this whole idea, right? Is that connecting this Iphigeneia and the bears and Tori to this to that bear rites that we see at Baronia, right?
And also this because we've talked about it so much in the killing of the child. Usually it's the killing of the firstborn son. But in a lot of these myths we're seeing in the past couple of weeks, it's the daughter at puberty. And even in the Indian ones we were talking about, it's like a fruit. When they get ripe, they got to steal it and take it. There's like a certain
there's a
in
power.
some of them, the daughters agree to be sacrificed in some honorable thing to please the father, they're saying. And in a lot of them, the daughter is saved at the last second, is interceded, gets a boon by some god.
Yeah.
And you're seeing this from Etruscan, Greece, Anatolian, up to the Vedic.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. That's wild. It's really important to point it out, and it's essential to both the Artemis and the Hecate mythologies, right? So it's beautiful. So this I wanted to point out is Aristophanes talks about what you were saying, the Baronian rites of the bears. And this is from his play, The Lysistrata. Okay. When I was 7, I immediately served as an Erphoros. Then at 10, I was an Aleritis for Athena Archegetus. Then wearing the saffron dress, I was a bear at the Brauronia. And once I, a beautiful child, was a basket carrier wearing a necklace of dried figs. So we're getting all this stuff about the wedding and the transition from girlhood into womanhood. And it has to do with, like you were saying, pretending to be a bear. You have to play at being a bear. And you have to go through the bear games, and then you can get married.
And because I think the basket and the fig, because we know what the connotations of the basket. There's always something in the basket.
Right. Always.
And the figs, and this is sounding very Dionysic or Bacchic at that point. And at that point, Artemis doesn't want anything to do with it.
Nope. At that point, she's out, right? We know
But
that the dried figs and the pomegranates are sex, euphemisms or flesh euphemisms, right?
and part of that's funny because there's part of the mythology is but the pomegranate and the rose. All right, when the beloved John is in Ephesus at his gravesite, to this day they have a shrine there in Turkey, and they believe that it produces red dust that they call rhodus. But it means to like a will, but it also means pomegranate. And they take the red dust and suppose it heals them. And it's a tradition there at Ephesus in modern day Turkey. Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy. Still going. So this is a scolion that is talking about this kind of stuff from Theocritus. It says, "For they hold it customary to carry a sacrificial basket to Artemis, those females about to be married, as an expiation for their maidenhood, lest they be resented by her. And those females of an age to wed used to bear sacrificial baskets to Artemis as an apology for their maidenhood to the goddess, so that she might not be angry." So
Right.
the baskets and these cups that they have, they got to go and beg Artemis, and they got to become the bear to prove that they're strong enough
I'm
to
sorry.
handle
I'm
these
sorry.
men. And don't hate me for getting laid, please.
Aphrodite did it to me.
Right,
Eros did it. I'm sorry.
It's wild. So here are some of these cups, these basket things that they found, and on them were depictions of these young girls with these robes playing these games, dressed up as bears and doing these rites, chasing each other. So it's pretty interesting, I thought, and just wild to see. So in more of this light, this comes to us. This is from Cyrene, and this is on a plaque that was outside of a temple to Artemis, and is talking about the women rights and a bunch of the stuff that goes on. So this is one of the coolest sources I found. It said, "A bride comes to the bedchamber. She must bring a penalty to Artemis, and she herself may not be under the same roof as her man or husband, and must not be polluted until she comes to Artemis. She who has not done these things is willingly polluted, having purified the Artemitian temple of Artemis. Let her sacrifice an adult animal as a penalty, and then go to the bedchamber. If she is unwillingly polluted, let her purify the sanctuary. A bride must go down to the Nymphaeon, to Artemis, whenever she wishes during the Artemisia, but the sooner the better. She who does not go down, let her sacrifice to Artemis what is customary at the Artemisia. As one who has not gone down, let her purify the sanctuary and sacrifice in addition an adult animal as penalty. A pregnant bride, before giving birth, shall go down to the Nymphaeon to Artemis. Let her give to the Arcos, the bear priestess of Artemis, the feet and the head and the skin. If she does not go down before giving birth, let her go down with an adult animal. Let her who has gone down be pure the 7th, 8th, and 9th days, and may she who has not gone down be pure these same days. If she is polluted, having purified herself, may she purify the sanctuary and sacrifice in addition an adult animal as penalty."
Yeah, and that's the thing. Artemis likes blood. It's
Yep.
cool with the blood. The bloodshed goes back to ancient times. They had human sacrifices, went into animal sacrifices, went into just blood on the altar at the temple in some form of whipping or and part of it, the sacrifice is hunting of the animal, the screaming of the animal. It wants some chaotic energy involved in it to produce that energetic charge.
Absolutely. It's so wild, and we're seeing here, right? It's also this idea that you must appease the god. Artemis demands blood. If you're going to go out and break chastity and you're going to no longer be under her care as a child, right? Then you have to sacrifice an animal in her name as penalty. Otherwise, she's not going to let it. You know, she'll curse you. And especially if you're going to have a baby, right? You want to make sure that birth is going to go well. You got to go and sacrifice to these bear priestesses. It's interesting. So this comes to us from Diodorus Siculus in his library. And this is another really good talking about the prophets. This is that source I was telling you about the virgins and the crones. So in the old days, it is said that it was maidens who sang prophecies because of their undefiled nature and their similarity to Artemis. For they say the maidens were well equipped to observe the secret sayings of the oracles. In more recent times, they say that the Echecrates, the Thessalonians, having gone to an oracle shrine and having seen the oracle, an uttering maiden, fell in love with her because of her beauty and seized and violated her. And the residents of Delphi, because of this experience, henceforth stipulated that no longer would a maiden prophesy, but a woman over 50 years old. She is dressed up in a maiden's garb as a reminder of the prophet of old. So gross men ruined it. Rapist, horrible jerks ruined it. But the point also is that in old age, women regain this power of prophecy or have access to it again if they remain chaste, you know?
Yeah, so because in some versions they think that having the birth of the child
right
ruins the prophetic powers.
It's true. It's interesting. There's all these different versions, right? So this comes to us from Pausanias's description of Greece. And this is talking about Artemis Hymnia. And we're going to see more of this kind of... I just wanted to include this one because of this mention of the Essenes. You'll see, it's pretty wild. In the territory of Orchomenos, to the left of the road from the Agkission, on a slope of the mountain is a sanctuary of Artemis Hymnia. The Mantians also claim it, and a priestess and a male priest. For them it is established that they be pure, not only in terms of sexual intercourse, but also in terms of daily living. Theirs is not like that of the people, and they may not enter the house of a private man. Other such things I know the office holding devotees of Artemis in Ephesus do, although not for more than 1 year. The citizens call them Essenes. They hold an annual festival for Artemis Hymnia. So they're talking about how there are these priests and priestesses who are dedicated to Artemis, who live this absolute pure lifestyle in the wilderness where they don't have sex, but do these purity rites. Who are the Jewish Essenes? Who are the Jewish Essenes? Do you know, Dion?
Yeah, we'll have to talk about that in a future episode.
Right? Well, the Essenes, you know, they're supposed to be mystics, and a lot of people cite them as these pre-Christian ecstatics who became, many of them became Christians, and they were apocalyptic, and they lived in the wilderness, and they had these communities where they practiced these purity rites of ritual bathing, and this is said to be a good Jewish thing.
Shout out to Flaw Dog.
Dead Sea Scrolls are from the Essenes, right?
Just say.
Interesting. Let's continue. Okay, so this comes to us from Strabo in his geography. And this is going off, so this is going to that we're talking about Artemis Hymnia and that tradition where you have the male and the female priests who are abstinent. But here you're now going to see the trans priests, the ones who undergo the eunuch rites, right? And become women. So they have eunuch priests who they call megabizoi, and they also always send out throughout the area for those worthy of such a position, and they lead them in the great honor. It was necessary for these men to serve together with the maidens. So at Ephesus, this is hugely important. The Corybantes, these priests who undergo the eunuch rites and become these female priestesses connected to Artemis. It's like a huge deal, and they're essential to doing the rites. You know, they have to scare away, they have to clang and bang their shields in order to protect Dionysus. You know, and in order to assure that Hera doesn't come and find him when they're hiding him after he's born from the thigh of Zeus, and he's being protected and raised and nursed by Rhea. And this is part of the thing that's going on. It's pretty crazy. And we've talked a lot about these various, for lack of a better word, trans cults that are associated with the various great mothers, right? We have the Galli or the Galloi, the Coriobantes, the
Inari,
from the Scythians, and now we have
the Hydra,
the Hydra in India. You see them all over the place, right? It's very, very common. All right, let's continue. So this is one of the most wild things I read. I was digging through all of Pausanias, finding like crazy references, and this one is going to blow your mind. We're getting to get into the violence now with Artemis. So it's a bit of a longer read, so bear with me, but it's going to show you how intense her rites got. Okay, so this is again from Descriptions of Greece. On the Acropolis of Patrae is a sanctuary of Artemis Laphria. The goddess's title is foreign, having been brought from elsewhere along with the statue. For when Calydon and the rest of Aetolia was devastated by King Augustus, so as to have Aetolia merge with Nicopolis above Acteon, then the Patrians got the statue of Laphria. For just as many other statues from Aetolia and around Acteon were brought to Nicopolis, Augustus gave both the statue of Laphria and other spoils from Calydon to the Patrians, and even up to my day it stands in honor on the Acropolis of Patrae. They say the goddess's epithet Laphria comes from a Phocian man, for Laphrion, the son of Castalius, son of Delphus, dedicated the ancient statue of Artemis in Calydon, for whom it was a sign of Artemis's wrath. Over time, they say this wrath caused Onius, lightened Elephantrion, or Elephoteron, and please forgive my pronunciation, everyone, and they prefer this as the origin of the epithet. The appearance of the statue is one of hunting. It is made of ivory and gold. Menachmos, Soidas, the Nopticians made it. They reckon them to be not much later than the Fluorit of Canacos of Sicyon and Callion of Aegina. The Patrians hold a Laphrian festival for Artemis every year, in which the manner of sacrifice is a local one. In a circle around the altar, they heap green wood, and each log is 16 cubits. Within these, upon the altar lie the driest logs. At the time of the festival, they contrive to make the road to the altar smoother, placing earth upon the altar steps. First, then they proceed in a magnificent parade for Artemis, and the maiden priestess rides at the end of the parade on a chariot drawn by yoked deer. Then on the following day, it is their custom to do the sacrifice thus, and both the city publicly and no less the individual citizens hold this festival in high esteem, for they throw living birds onto the altar and comestible animals and sacral victims equally together, even wild pigs and deers and gazelles. Some cast on the cubs of wolves and bears, some full-grown wild animals. They also set up upon the altar the fruit of cultivated trees. They then cast fire onto the wood, and there I saw a bear or some other of the creatures being ravaged by the first onslaught of the fire try to get out, some fleeing at full strength. But those who cast them in bring them back again to the fire. They recall no one being harmed by the animals. So look how intense this is. They're burning live animals in a giant bonfire, and when they come out, they force them back in.
It's a barbecue. I'm just saying, that's crazy.
Absolutely. And it just shows you the level and the intensity of these sacrifices,
And
right?
here's the thing: they could kill the animal before.
They could have killed the animal, but they're not. They're
Yeah,
throwing them in live, right?
yeah, yeah,
Birds,
yeah,
bears, even, right? Cubs, doesn't matter.
yeah. That's part of the. It's part of the, and you've got the mythos of the great hunt,
Right.
which is part of a lot of cultures
Absolutely.
in the great sacrifice, but it's an energy transmission. It's not just so much of like, yeah, I killed something and here it is. It's it's the transference of energy.
You're right. We talked about this a lot in our one of our first episodes on the Grove when we got in deep with George Bataille. And he is really good for understanding this in his theories of religion. When he gets into this idea of
The cursed share.
the accursed share, right? And you have to expel wealth, right? We have this abundance of stuff and we need to deal with it. We need to, and the whole idea of art is it's a wasteful creation, sex for the point of sex, destruction for the sake of destruction. There's power in this kind of cathartic release, this destructive act, whether it's destroying the self or someone else or something else, there's power in that waste, right? It's that black sun energy,
We don't
Power
advocate that at home, just so
No,
you
we
know.
don't. We don't. But it doesn't mean that it's not, that there isn't something to it, right? There's a reason why all cultures are doing something like this at some point in history, So
And it's
people
good to
are
be aware of it and cognitive, because lest you become the cursed share yourself in somebody
right,
else's fantasy.
right. That's a good point. Good point. But Ty talked about that a lot as well, right? He said that the accursed share shifted to government sending people off in conscription, or in poisoning people in other ways, but the same expenditure of life is happening, right? For the same reasons. Oof. So let's continue. I wanted to get into Iphigenia and Iphimedeia and that idea of them becoming Hecate and this connection to Artemis. And this is sort of like one of the most important Artemis myths. And when I was looking into this, I found that the earliest reference to this story of Iphigenia or Iphimedeia being teleported comes to us actually from a summary of another text that has been lost. There's a famous text called the Kypria that has been lost, but people have told us what the Kypria was said to say. And this is the earliest reference, even earlier than Homer, talking about this. So it says, Agamemnon, out hunting, shot a deer and asserted that he had outdone even Artemis. The goddess was angered and sent storms to prevent them from sailing. And when Calchas had declared the anger of the goddess and said that Iphigenia should be sacrificed to Artemis, they sent for her on the pretext that she was to be married to Achilles and attempted to sacrifice her. But Artemis snatched her away and took her to the Toroi, making her immortal, and she set a deer at the altar in place of the girl.
Oh no, it's wild. In the myth, it says the whole time she's being led to the altar, thinking she's going to her sacred marriage, and so she's happy.
Right? Gonna marry Achilles.
Yeah, yeah. So that's why that part of the bait and switch. It's a big part of the story.
Absolutely. It's so wild. So here's another version, and you had mentioned this version. This comes to us from Pseudo Hesiod, the Catalog of Women. The well-grieved Achaeans sacrificed Iphimedeia on the altar of clear-toned Artemis of the golden distaff on that day when they sailed with their ships to Ilion to exact vengeance for the beautiful ankled Argive, her image, that is. She herself, the arrow-showering deer hunter, easily saved, and placed lovely ambrosia upon her head so that her skin might be everlasting. She made her immortal and ageless for all time. Now the tribes of men on earth call her Artemis Enodia, attendant of the glorious arrow shooter. of the roads. Enodia means of the roads. That is almost only ever mentioned with Hecate, the crossroads, the guider of the path, right? So Artemis Enodia, this is Hecate. So Iphimedeia isn't killed. She is turned into this immortal goddess, Hecate or Artemis Enodia. Beautiful, eh?
Love it.
So I wanted to go to the most famous source. So we're now at Iphigenia at Toroi by Euripides. So this is what he has to say, the same basic passage. O Agamemnon, ruler of this Greek army, the ship may not set out from land before you should sacrifice your daughter Iphigenia and Artemis receive her. For that which is most beautiful born this year you promised to sacrifice to the light-bearing goddess. And so your wife Clytemnestra bore a child in the house, the most beautiful thing to be brought to me, and so you must sacrifice her. Those are the words of Artemis from Euripides, right? So I have a few more different passages I want to show, but we're winding down here. So this is from Herodotus, who's talking about this entire story in the different traditions and trying to have that kind of historian outsider view. So this is what he has to say about the Tauroi and the customs of the Taurians.
Yeah.
The Tauroi used the following customs. They sacrificed to the maiden, Parthenos, in the following manner. Those sailors and those they seize of the Greeks at sea. To start the rite, they bashed the head with a club. Some say that they tossed the body down a cliff, for the cliff stands by the sanctuary. Then they impale the head. Others agree about the head bashing, but they do not say that they tossed the body from the cliff, but rather bury it in the ground. The same Tauroi say that the divinity to whom they sacrifice is Iphigenia, the daughter of Agamemnon.
The high priestess of the Tauropolos.
The high priestess of the Tauropolos, Hecate, mother of Medea, Iphimedeia, right? Okay. So that was Herodotus. Now we're going to see what Pausanias has to say about the same story. That say it's the heroine of Iphigenia, for she died in Megara. Now I have heard a different story about Iphigenia told by the Arcadians, and I know that Hesiod recounted in his catalogue of women that Iphigenia did not die, but was Hecate by will of Artemis. And Herodotus, agreeing with this, wrote that the Taurians who lived near Scythia sacrifice shipwrecked sailors to a Parthenos, and that they themselves say that the Parthenos is Iphigenia, daughter of Agamemnon, right? So there we're getting all these traditions coalescing at these two sacred sites, Baronia and at Megara and Toroi. So next I wanted to get into some of the Lacedaemonian, the Spartan stuff, because I remember you telling me about all those kind of whipping stuff, and I saw some references in the books, and I had to share the sources of the cheese whipping. So the earliest source for the cheese whipping comes to us from Xenophon on the constitution of the Lacedaemonians. And here he's talking about King Lycurgus. King Lycurgus established it as a noble thing to steal as many cheeses as possible from Orithyia, the winged Artemis, while he arranged for others to flog them, wanting to show by this that in enduring pain for a short time, one would derive happiness for a long
time.
And then Plutarch tells more about this whipping stuff. The boys, the padis, then are flogged with whips the entire day at the altar of Artemis or Thea, often until death. They, joyful and exultant, endure it, striving with each other for victory, whoever of them endures being beaten the most and worst. And the one who prevails in these things is held in the highest repute. This contest is called the flagellation, and it takes place each year. So they even killed some of them. So human sacrifice is still happening.
Well, because the altar of Artemis needs blood. And that was the whole point why they would whip them in front of the altar right there, because it needed the blood. Blood has to be spilled in the form of a static hunt. It's during the hunt. You can't just sacrifice. It has to be, there has to be some tension. Not saying adrenochrome, but just,
It's got to be that wildness. You know, she is the goddess of that uncivilized, terrifying, dark world, right? She's the ultimate hunter, that force of the night that pursues you to consume you, right? Often in modern times, we focus on Artemis, the nurse, but Artemis is this terrifying, Amazonian warrior who hunts with her virgin giants. So this is more on the Spartans, and this comes from Plutarch's Life of Lycurgus. He arranges for men to carry wood, and the smaller boys herbs, having stolen them. Some make their way about the gardens, others creep into the men's mess halls. Well, sneakily and guardedly. If one is caught, he receives many blows with the whip, seeming to steal lazily and without technique. They steal whatever food they can, learning cleverly to set upon those sleeping or off their guard. To the one caught, the penalty is whipping and hunger, for their meals are sparse, so that in this way they might defend themselves from want and of necessity and be daring and inventive. The Spartan version of the cult of Artemis is freaking intense, okay? And just continuing, this comes to us from Hyginus and his Fabulae. Upon obtaining an oracle because he had lost his sister and had sought out Colchis with his comrade Pleiades, and after the killing of Theos, absconded with the Xenon, that is the Aeon, of Artemis Tauropolos. This is the wooden statue that is the center of the story of Iphigenia Tauroi that Orestes steals, right? Hidden in a bundle of wood and brought it to Aricia. But because the cult's cruelty subsequently displeased the Romans, even though it was slaves who were sacrificed, Diana was transferred to the Spartans, where the customs of sacrifice continued in the whipping of boys, called the Bomoikiae, altars victors, because having been placed above the altar, they contended to see who can endure the most blows. So there you can say, like, this cult spread around, but a lot of people couldn't handle the bloodshed and the demand, Artemis is not for the faint of heart. So let's continue here. We got Pausanias again. We're talking more about the story of Orestes and this Zoanon, the statue. So the region is called Limnaeon, and there is a sanctuary of Artemis Orthia. They say that the Zoanon is the one Orestes and Iphigenia once stole out of the Tauric land. The Lacedaemonians say that they brought it to their own land because Orestes was also king there. And here is my proof that the Lacedaemonian Orthia is a Zoanon from barbarous lands. Astrabacos and Alopecos, sons of Irbos, sons of Amphiphanes and Amphiceles, sons of Aegis, having found the statue, immediately went mad. Additionally, the Spartan Limnadians and the Kynosaures and those who from Messoa and Pitane, when sacrificing to Artemis, had a dispute from which they became murderously angry. And while many were killed at the altar, a plague destroyed the rest. And upon this, an oracle came to them to stain the altar with the blood of humans. The one sacrificed was chosen by lot. But Lycurgus changed it to the whipping of youths there, and thus the altar is filled with the blood of humans. Here is the section dealing with the priestess and the Zoanon given above. Thus for the statue there remains the enjoyment of human blood, since the sacrifice is in Tauric lands. So, there you
the
go.
Tauropolos. And in the statue that you're talking about has no arms.
Yeah.
That's why part of the limnia, it's held up by reeds. they find it held up by reeds. And it's one of the violent versions of Artemis, that they went from, like I said, human sacrifice to animal sacrifice to, no, you just need to sacrifice onto the altar. It wants blood on the altar.
Right. Wow. It's so wild. So I really wanted to show you guys and talk about this kind of connection between Artemis and Hecate and Iphigenia and Iphimedeia and that kind of Helios line. And I wanted to show you a bunch of the earliest sources, so we really got a depiction of who Artemis was. And lastly, I wanted to end you with a quote from Lucius Apuleius' The Golden Ass, because the final kind of story for the goddess is that before the Christians took over, she becomes part of this great mother cult that really spreads across the Mediterranean and becomes syncretized with so many of these different mother goddesses. And this comes to us from the only complete and surviving Latin novel, The Golden Ass or Metamorphosis by Lucius Apuleius. Now, Apuleius was a follower of the Great Mother who went to many of these cult sites and received initiation. He's a really interesting character in his own right, because he was accused of casting love magic on a widow in order to steal her money and have sex with her. And he had to write this book called the Apologia to defend himself. But they were going to kill him for this. And he managed to defend himself. And then in response after that, he wrote The Golden Ass. And The Golden Ass he wrote as a retelling of an earlier Greek story by another character who we don't know. Like, it's been lost. The original version has been lost. We do have another telling in Greek from Lucian, the famous satirist. But the original that Lucian and Lucius Apuleius are both pulling from is gone. And it's said to be done by another guy named Lucius of Patrae. So Lucius Apuleius, he saw himself reflected in this story of Lucius of Patrae, which was also about a guy obsessed with magic who travels around the Mediterranean, joining all kinds of mother goddesses cults and getting into shenanigans. So it's just super interesting. And I wanted to show you that there's this magic tradition of these people who are going to these different groups and getting initiated, like Lucian, like Lucius Apuleius, like Lucius of Patrae. And they are connecting all these mother goddesses at one. This comes to us from the very end of Apuleius's Golden Ass, and is one of the most powerful passages I've ever read in Greek or Roman anything. It goes, this comes from the voice of the goddess herself, just before Lucius gets to transform back into a man, when he's finally at the end of the story. I am the parent of nature, mistress of all elements, firstborn of the ages, supreme authority, queen of the dead, first in heaven, the singular manifestation of gods and goddesses, whose sole divinity is multiform, of varied rites, worshipped by many names throughout the whole world. Amongst the firstborn Phrygians, I am Pessinuntia. Divine Mother, here the Octothonous Athenians call me the Cecropian Minerva. There the wave-tossed Cyprians call me the Paphian Venus. Arrow-bearing Cretans call me Diana Dictina. The trilingual Sicilians call me Stygian Proserpina. The Eleusinians, the ancient goddess Ceres. Others Juno. Others Bellona. Others Hecate. Those Rhamnusia and the Ethiopians, first lit by the rays of the sun, and the Egyptians, strong in ancient doctrines, honor me with my own rites and call me by my true name, Queen Isis. Pretty beautiful, eh?
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was a good way also to connect it to this whole idea of Materia Prima and the mother goddess cults that we've been talking about this whole time. So what do you think about all that now that we've dug deep into Artemis? What is your thoughts on Artemis? What do you think she represents?
Feminine energy, youthful. How could I explain it? It's the virginal childbearing goddess.
Right.
She demands blood sometimes. She can give birth. It's tough. it's tough to describe the goddess there.
Right? She's such a wild goddess. She's really, she's she who hunts, as Dr. Carla calls her. She is the right. I see her as this threshold guardian like Hecate, where she is the one who aids women in the transition from maidenhood to womanhood, and from womanhood to old age. She's really a feminine divinity in the truest sense, and even though she doesn't go through motherhood, right, which is one of her most defining features, is that she stays that youth, she stays that young image of womanhood, but therefore is able to represent all women. And she's also this unconsciousness, right? She's that unconscious, terrifying, wild aspect related to birth, related to the wilderness, related to that threshold, because we also see her as this guardian between civilization and wildness, right? Sometimes she's a protector of the city like Athena. Sometimes she's someone you need to protect the city from, right? So it's she's such an interesting, deep goddess, but I think fundamentally she's that threshold between youth and adulthood, the uncivilized civilization, wildness, and all of that coming in. She's that potential, that fear, that panic.
Mm-hmm. So next week, Medea.
Next week, Medea. Right now that
Medea connects to all these goddesses.
Right,
we've talked about connected.
Yeah, we talked about Great Mother Artemis. Now then we talked about Mother Hecate, and now we're going to talk about Daughter Medea.
Yeah. So like, subscribe, share, leave some wild comments.
Yeah.
Get ready for next week. We'll have some fun.
Right. And if you guys have any sources that we missed or things you want to share with us about the goddess, post them in the comments as well. We love to see it. And join in the conversation with us on the Discord, Myth and Lore. Both Dion and I are there. And yeah, tune in next week for more Occult Exploration Society. And we may be getting more Neil and Dr. Ammon. They were both unfortunately unable to join. Ammon wasn't needed today to rest. And Neil, he moved and can't get the internet.
Oh, wow. Wow. Well, so, I want to move into a condo too.
Right. Well, I'm going to pick his brain and see if he wants to tell that and let him tell it. But yeah, Neil is living the life, living the dream, moving on to big things. So wish Neil lots of love. All right, everyone. Thank you guys for joining us. And we'll see you again next week. We're the Occult Explorers. Any final words, Dion?
Live your best life.
Live your best life. All right. Peace and love, friends. Take care.